At a fundraising gala held in the grand ballroom of Skylux Tower, a billionaire threw money like garbage, the bills hitting Maya's skin. A black janitor, she gripped her mop handle tightly, holding back her pain from the arrogant attitude of the billionaire Richard Cross. A few hours later, the roles were reversed. Richard lay on the elevator floor, his lips purple, his eyes wide, reaching for Maya and begging her to save his life. The man who had once trampled on her was now helpless. If you were Maya, what would you do? Late at night, the Skylux Tower still blazed like a beacon in the city. Its giant glass panels reflected the street's neon lights, casting a cold yellow glow. This was a place where the elite gathered, where every footstep was heavy with power and money. Yet, deep in the basement levels, life was slow and harsh, as if it belonged to a different world entirely. Maya Johnson, 27, wore a worn, dark blue uniform as she pushed a cart full of cleaning supplies. Her old sneakers squeaked with every step on the polished corridor. Her face was sun-darkened, her hands calloused from chemicals. But her deep brown eyes still shone with resilience, as if, no matter how far she was pushed down, she would never give up. Maya had once studied nursing. She was a bright, hard-working student, with a dream of becoming a nurse in a big hospital. However, the sudden death of her mother and a crushing debt forced her to drop out. Instead of a white lab coat, she put on a cleaning uniform. Instead of saving lives, she held a mop to earn every dollar to pay off her debts. No one in this glamorous building knew her past, and no one cared. Maya's shift began at 8 in the evening and lasted until nearly dawn. With a few colleagues, she quietly cleared broken glasses, wiped up spilled wine, and collected the trash left behind by the upper crust after their parties. They moved silently, speaking in hushed tones, like invisible shadows weaving through the opulent lights. The unwritten rule here was clear. VIP guests and security guards were the superiors, while the cleaning staff were the lowest tier, not meant to exist within their sight. Richard Cross, the owner of Cross International Real Estate Corporation, was the leader of that world. He not only owned Skylux Tower, but was also a familiar face on the covers of financial magazines. At 55, his tall build and scattered gray hairs added to his air of authority. The media hailed him as a self-made legend, a man who started from nothing. But in the eyes of his employees, Richard was the embodiment of coldness and cruelty. He always believed that money could buy anything, including the dignity of low-wage workers. Once, Maya witnessed Richard casually fire a security guard just because the man had mistakenly opened a side door for a delivery person passing through the main lobby. "This isn't a place for ordinary people," he had said, his voice as cold as steel. The guard left with his head bowed, and no one dared to defend him. From that day on, Maya understood that in this building, Richard Cross's arrogance was the law. Yet, Maya never lost faith in what she had learned. She always carried a small first aid kit in her bag, a habit she couldn't break. Sometimes when a colleague slipped or cut a hand, Maya would quickly treat the wound, her eyes lighting up with an unusual brightness as she applied the bandage. It was as if she never stopped dreaming of returning to the path she had left behind. Tonight, the building was even more bustling than usual. Skylux Tower was hosting a lavish fundraising gala for the city's wealthiest. Limousines lined up in front of the lobby, and guests strode in wearing sparkling evening gowns and tuxedos. Inside, a band played a smooth jazz tune, and laughter echoed down the hallways. Maya stood from a distance, watching it all through the glass door of the service area. She saw Richard Cross enter, his form-fitting black suit and red tie, an emblem of power. He shook hands with his peers, his booming laugh filling the air. Richard's gaze swept past the security guards and servers, then stopped coldly when he saw Maya cleaning a corner of the lobby. That look, as usual, made her feel like nothing more than a stain on the shiny marble floor. Right after, the service manager came over and quietly berated Maya for a wet streak she hadn't had a chance to dry yet. A colleague of hers was also docked pay for accidentally using the staff elevator in front of a VIP guest. These things happened every day, so familiar that those in the profession just bit their tongues and carried on in silence. But inside Maya, each injustice built up, layering like dust she could never wipe clean. She had no idea that in just a few hours, this familiar order would be turned on its head. And she, the person who had always been considered invisible, would become the center of attention that everyone would be forced to acknowledge. The music in the grand hall was lively. Crystal glasses clinked together, blending with the arrogant laughter of the rich. Maya bent over, meticulously mopping up a wet mark on the gleaming floor. She was used to it. In a few minutes, everything would be as clean as if nothing had happened. But a pair of footsteps stopped right in front of her, and she looked up. Richard Cross. He stood there, his face expressionless, his eyes glinting with contempt. In his hand was a wad of fresh bills he'd just taken from his wallet. Before she could even process what was happening, Maya saw the money fly directly at her cheek. A cold, dry rustle filled the air as the bills fluttered and scattered across the stone floor. "Here, that's your pay. Pick it up, you piece of trash," Richard said in a low, cruelly cold voice. A moment of dead silence fell over the room. The music still played, but everyone seemed to hear his words clearly. Guests exchanged glances. A few snickered behind their hands, while others turned away awkwardly. No one intervened. Maya tightened her grip on the mop, her hand trembling. Her cheek was stinging, but her heart burned even more from the humiliation. The service manager immediately appeared, shooing Maya away as if she were the cause of the trouble. "Get to the back. Don't disturb the guests." Maya bowed her head, silently gathering the scattered bills. Each one she picked up felt like a knife cutting into her pride. But she said nothing, just silently pulled her cart back to the technical area. Richard's eyes followed her, the corner of his mouth curling into an arrogant smirk. In the cramped technical room, Maya slumped down, taking a long breath to calm herself. She opened her first aid kit, a habit she used for comfort. Her fingers brushed over a syringe, bandages, and a tiny vial of adrenaline. These items reminded her of her unfinished nursing career. She couldn't save her mother, and now she could only treat her colleagues' minor injuries. While checking the air purifier on the upper floor, Maya noticed a red, blinking warning light. The ventilation system in the penthouse area was reporting a malfunction. She quickly called the control room, but the on-duty staff member just gave a nonchalant laugh. "It's a VIP party tonight. Who cares about a little warning? Let the engineer check it in the morning." A chill went down Maya's spine. She knew that small errors could sometimes lead to big disasters, but she also knew her place. No one would listen to a warning from a cleaner. The party in the main hall continued. Guests raised their glasses to Richard Cross, praising him like a king. From a distance, Maya saw his commanding figure, his booming laugh. A lump of anger rose in her throat. The man who had just trampled on her in front of everyone was now being hailed as a symbol of success. A colleague leaned in and whispered, "You're lucky you still have a job. He once slapped a manager for serving wine at the wrong temperature." Maya didn't reply. She just kept cleaning in silence, but her eyes held a determined glint. She didn't know that this small warning signal would be the start of a fateful night. A night when Richard Cross's throne of power would shake, and Maya's silence would become a life-saving sword. The music in the grand hall shifted to more lively jazz tunes. Guests raised their glasses, and laughter echoed throughout the hall. 2 hours had passed since Richard threw money in Maya's face. Now, he stood at the center of the party, raising a champagne flute and basking in praise for his success. His face was arrogant and self-satisfied. He didn't even remember the nameless cleaner he had just humiliated. Maya continued to work quietly, but her eyes never left the small screen in the technical room. The error light on the penthouse ventilation system kept blinking. She frowned, trying to call the control room again. The only response was a brusque voice. "No disturbances tonight. VIP guests are up there. Any repairs can wait until tomorrow morning." Maya pressed her lips together. The instinct of a former nursing student told her something was wrong. But what was the word of a janitor worth in this arrogant tower? Up in the penthouse, the billionaire was inviting guests to try a new appetizer prepared by a world-class chef. He held a glass of red wine, took a small sip, then boasted about his upcoming deal. Richard's voice was booming and solid, like the promise of a man with absolute power. No one dared to interrupt him. Meanwhile, Maya was forced by her manager to leave the main area and check the side corridors. The service elevator was suddenly locked to maintain a luxurious image, forcing her to walk through the dark hallways. She went to the equipment closet, trying to find a warning sign to put up, but they had all been taken for party decorations. A security guard's walkie-talkie crackled nearby. The tech supervisor was moved to the main lobby to help with security. No one is on duty in the penthouse. Maya's heart sank. She turned to the secondary monitor. The alarm had escalated to high risk. Just a few minutes later, in the party room high above, Richard began to cough uncontrollably. At first, a few guests thought he had just choked on his wine, but the coughs became more frequent, and his face turned from red to purple. He clutched his throat, his eyes wide with terror. The bitter irony was that he was having an anaphylactic shock right after trying the appetizer prepared by the famous chef, something he had spent millions of dollars to acquire. The music suddenly stopped, and a panicked cry echoed through the room. "Call an ambulance! Hurry!" a guest yelled. But the phone signal in the penthouse was spotty, and the internal communication system was jammed. A security guard rushed to the emergency equipment box, but when he opened it, the only vial of adrenaline was expired, and the syringe was rusted. Maya heard the commotion echoing down through the ventilation system. Her heart pounded. She knew the sound of anaphylactic shock all too well. Without thinking, Maya rushed to the control panel, entering a secondary code to try to open the elevator again. Access denied. The penthouse floor was in priority mode, locking all entrances and exits to prevent unauthorized access. The billionaire himself had ordered that feature installed to ensure absolute privacy for his elite guests. Maya didn't give up. She ran down the hallway, searching for an emergency exit that only longtime employees knew about. She remembered the words of an old security guard who had worked there, who had shown her the secret passage and given her a worn-out master key. "Just in case. Only the old staff know about this," he had said. The lock was rusty, but the master key in her pocket fit perfectly. The door swung open, and a rush of stuffy air led straight upstairs. She clutched her first aid kit and climbed the cold iron stairs, one step at a time. In the penthouse, Richard collapsed to the floor, his lips pale. The guests around him were panicking. No one had the medical knowledge to help. One person yelled, "Somebody do something!" and "He's not breathing anymore." Just then, Maya appeared through a side door, her breath ragged, a syringe in her hand. The crowd froze. A few people reacted with hostility. "She's a cleaner!" Who let her in? But Maya didn't pay them any mind. Her eyes were fixed on Richard, the man who had just humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. Now, he was lying trembling on the marble floor, his pleading eyes unfocused. Maya knelt down, her voice firm. "If I don't give him a shot now, he'll stop breathing." Her hand trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. The needle went in, and the medicine flowed into his bloodstream. The guests held their breath, watching. A long, seemingly endless moment passed. Richard gave a slight twitch, and his ragged breaths slowly began to return. But one shot wasn't enough to save him. The shock hadn't subsided. Maya looked up, sweat beading on her forehead. He needs a breathing mask, and we need to restart the ventilation system now. But the system was still locked, and only the master code could open it. The bitter irony was that Richard himself had ordered the safety checks to be skipped so the party could start on time. Maya realized that if she didn't intervene, he would die right in front of everyone. She clutched her first aid kit, her eyes shining brightly in the penthouse's dazzling golden light. The crisis was just beginning. The air in the penthouse was suffocatingly heavy. Richard Cross lay sprawled out, his chest heaving with labored, gasping breaths that tore through the tense atmosphere. The guests, who had always bowed before his power and money, now huddled in a corner, their eyes wide with fear. No one dared to touch him, and no one knew what to do. Maya knelt beside him, pressing her ear to his chest to listen to his heartbeat. It was erratic, as if it could burst at any moment. The first injection had worked, but it was only enough to keep him alive for a few more minutes. "He needs oxygen now," Maya yelled, her voice sharp amid the chaos. A security guard fumbled with the emergency medical cabinet, but it was empty. All the equipment had been cut as part of Richard's cost-saving orders. Maya clenched her fist. In that moment, she saw the bitter irony clearly. This powerful man was paying the price for his own arrogance and cutbacks. "There's nothing left?" a high-profile guest asked, her voice trembling. Maya took a deep breath, then slowly opened the small bag at her side. Inside was the first aid kit she always carried, the very thing no one would expect a cleaner to keep so carefully. A portable breathing mask and a backup dose of adrenaline glimmered in the light. The crowd was stunned. A female guest gasped, "She's carrying medical equipment!" Maya didn't answer. She focused on fitting the mask over Richard's mouth, pumping oxygen from the small portable tank. His breathing became steadier, but his eyes were still closed. She knew she only had a few minutes left. If the ventilation system wasn't restarted to purify the air, all her efforts would be for nothing. Maya jumped to her feet and ran to a secondary control panel hidden in a corner of the room. She entered an emergency code that only those familiar with the technical systems would know. The screen flashed. "Low-level access! Limited functions!" Shouts erupted behind her. "What is she doing?" "Stop her!" But then they fell silent as they watched Maya rapidly type a complex series of numbers. It was a technical code she had memorized from brief conversations with an engineer colleague during breaks. A beep sounded, and the screen switched to an open state. A powerful gust of wind whooshed through the vents, carrying away the acrid odor that had been making everyone uncomfortable. Maya turned back, knelt beside Richard, and administered a second dose. His body twitched slightly, and his eyes slowly began to open. His lips moved, and a faint, raspy sound came out. Maya. The room fell silent. The man who had thrown money in her face in front of 100 people was now calling her name, begging for a breath. Maya looked at him, a strange and bitter feeling rising within her. Her heart was pounding fiercely, but her hands were steady as she held the breathing mask. In that moment, the power had completely shifted to Maya. The astonished eyes of dozens of guests were all fixed on the anonymous working woman who just hours before had been treated like dirt. And they all understood. She was the fragile thread holding Richard Cross's life. The whooshing of the wind through the vents mixed with Richard Cross's raspy groans. He lay there, his expensive suit wrinkled, his frail breath completely dependent on the hands of a person he had scorned just hours earlier. Maya held the breathing mask, her eyes fixed on his face. A cold sweat trickled down her temple. In that moment, old memories rushed back, her mother's trembling hands begging for help on her deathbed years ago, and Maya's helpless watch as her life slipped away due to a lack of medicine. This time, she wouldn't let history repeat itself. "Stay calm. You'll be okay," Maya said, her voice both firm and cool. The surrounding guests backed away, their eyes wide with disbelief. These people who had been arrogant towards service staff were now pinning their hopes on an anonymous cleaner. One guest whispered, "If it wasn't for her, Richard would be dead." The head of security knelt beside her, his voice trembling. "We need to call for an ambulance right now." But the signal was still jammed. Maya looked up, her eyes as sharp as a knife. "Activate the emergency satellite transmission. It's in the auxiliary control cabinet." The guard was stunned for a moment, then immediately obeyed. The room fell into a strange state, where every command no longer came from Richard Cross, but from a cleaner. Maya gave quick, concise, and powerful instructions. Everyone followed. Richard's eyes fluttered open, his lips quivering. He whispered, so weakly that only Maya could hear, "Please, don't leave me." It wasn't an apology, but the sheer terror of a man used to holding absolute power, now completely helpless. That plea shook Maya. The man who had thrown money in her face, humiliated her like an object, was now begging her to save his life. In that instant, she fully understood the absolute reversal of power. Richard's heart began to beat erratically again. Maya immediately bent down and began chest compressions. Each press was a resounding beat in the silent room. The guests held their breath. The only sounds were Maya's desperate breathing and the chaotic thumping of his heart. After nearly a minute, Richard took a long, deep breath and his chest expanded. His breathing returned, weak but steady. Maya removed the breathing mask and checked his pupils. His eyes slowly regained focus, though they were still bewildered and trembling. He looked at Maya, his eyes full of shame and bitterness. He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched hers. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice choked, like a man who had lost everything. A loud clank echoed as the elevator door finally opened, thanks to the emergency signal. Medics rushed in and quickly took over the patient. Before he was wheeled away on the stretcher, Richard still clung to Maya's hand, his eyes filled with fear. The entire room was silent. The wealthy guests, the powerful businessmen, they all bowed their heads. They had witnessed an undeniable truth with their own eyes. The life of the richest man in the building had been saved by someone they wouldn't have even bothered to look at. As the medics took Richard away, Maya sat down on the floor, her breathing ragged. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes shone with a new firmness. She was no longer the silent shadow cleaning the hallways. Tonight, she had become the center of attention, forcing the entire world to see her. The truth was exposed. Richard himself had cut the safety check protocols to ensure the party started on time. That very arrogant decision had pushed him to the brink of death. And, ironically, his life was saved by the person he had publicly humiliated. That climax was an invisible judgment. No court was needed, no verdict was required. Everyone understood that Richard Cross had been struck down by his own arrogance. 2 days after the incident, news of the Skylux Tower Gala was all over the headlines. The video recorded by a guest, showing Richard Cross throwing money at Maya, went viral at lightning speed. The online community was outraged, calling for a boycott of him. Even worse, internal company documents were leaked, revealing that Richard had signed the order to cut safety protocols to save costs. His PR team's justifications were quickly shut down by the clear evidence. The board of directors held an emergency meeting. Inside the room, Richard sat listlessly in a wheelchair, his face pale after the anaphylactic shock, the arrogance he usually displayed now gone. The shareholders unanimously demanded his resignation and called for a full investigation. "You didn't just demean someone's dignity, you almost killed the entire building with your arrogance," one board member stated harshly. Richard bowed his head, powerless to fight back. For Maya, life changed overnight. At first, she was stunned to be invited to a public press conference. In front of the cameras, the building manager was forced to admit it was Maya Johnson who saved Mr. Richard Cross's life. The applause was deafening. For the first time, her name was called with respect. Afterward, a major hospital reached out, offering to fully sponsor her to finish her nursing program. The hospital director said plainly, "We need people who not only have skills, but also have heart." Maya stood there, silent, tears welling up. The dream she thought had died had suddenly reignited. In the Skylux Tower, guests and staff whispered about that fateful night. From then on, no one dared to look down on the cleaning staff anymore. One of Maya's colleagues quietly said, "You made all of us proud." As for Richard, the consequences were more than just his position and reputation. When he left the hospital, he walked with a limp, his eyes avoiding the reporters' cameras. From an icon of power, he became a cautionary tale of arrogance and the price that must be paid. No apology could ever erase the image of him on his knees, gasping for breath, calling out the name of the woman he had once humiliated. The story ends with Maya standing in front of a high-rise window, looking out at the city lit up with lights. In her hand is a letter of acceptance to return to nursing school. She smiles softly, not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who knows she has stepped out of the darkness and found her way back to the light. The fateful party at Skylux Tower ended, but its legacy echoed on. A man who once stood at the pinnacle of power had to bow his head and acknowledge his own fragility. A woman who was looked down upon in the dark basement became a beacon of salvation in a life-or-death moment. This story isn't just about the rare justice life sometimes grants. It's a reminder that a person's true value isn't in the money in their wallet, but in their heart and their character. Money can buy fear and silence, but it can never buy courage or the skills to save a life. Maya Johnson didn't seek revenge, didn't abandon him, and didn't use her humiliation as a reason to turn her back. She chose to save Richard Cross, even though her heart was filled with anger. In that moment, she proved that true strength isn't the power to oppress others, but the steadfast commitment to your humanity, even when facing the person who hurt you. On that day, Maya stepped out of the darkness of the basement, carrying a message greater than any speech. Never look down on someone just because they are in a low position, because when disaster strikes, they might be the very hand that pulls you back from the edge. Before this story closes, a question still lingers. If you were Maya, torn between the fury of humiliation and the chance to save the person who disgraced you, what would you choose?